The plane had been sitting on the tarmac for 3 hours. 3 long, suffocating hours that felt like an eternity. The air inside the cabin was thick with frustration, hunger, and the kind of exhaustion that only comes from international travel gone wrong. Passengers shifted restlessly in their seats, some muttering complaints, others simply staring ahead with glazed eyes, resigned to their fate. Amara pressed her face against the small window, watching the ground crew move about with no apparent urgency. Her stomach twisted, not just from hunger, but from anxiety. Every minute of delay meant another minute away from her 2 jobs back home. Every hour meant lost wages she desperately needed. She calculated in her head, if they took off now, she'd still make it to her evening shift at the campus library. But with each passing moment, that possibility slipped further away. The young woman pulled her threadbare sweater tighter around her shoulders. The air conditioning on the plane seemed to mock the passengers' discomfort, blowing cold air when what everyone really needed was movement, progress, hope that this journey would eventually end. Amara glanced at her phone, dead. She'd forgotten to charge it properly before leaving, too focused on making sure she had all her study materials for the flight. Those textbooks now sat heavy in her lap, their pages filled with notes she'd made in cramped handwriting, trying to maximize every blank space because she couldn't afford to buy notebooks as often as she needed them. Around her, the cabin hummed with discontent. A baby cried somewhere in the back, its wails cutting through the artificial calm that flight attendants tried desperately to maintain. Business travelers typed furiously on laptops, sending apologetic emails about missed meetings. Families huddled together, sharing whatever snacks they'd brought on board, knowing that airline meals, if they came at all, would be hours away. Then came the announcement that would change everything. "Ladies and gentlemen," the lead flight attendant's voice crackled over the intercom, professional but tinged with an unmistakable weariness, "we sincerely apologize for the continued delay. Due to unexpected catering issues combined with our extended time on the ground, we have a very limited number of meals available for this flight. We will be serving what we have on a first-come, first-served basis, but we must inform you that we only have enough for approximately 1/3 of our passengers." The reaction was immediate and visceral. Groans echoed through the cabin. Someone shouted an obscenity. Others simply shook their heads in disbelief. How could an international flight run out of meals? How was this even possible in this day and age? Amara felt her heart sink. She hadn't eaten since yesterday afternoon, saving her last few dollars for transportation home from the airport. The conference she'd attended, an academic symposium she'd fought so hard to get invited to, had provided breakfast and lunch, but she'd skipped the farewell dinner to make her flight. Now, that decision seemed foolish. The flight attendants began moving through the cabin with their limited supplies, and Amara watched as meals disappeared row by row. She was in row 23. The elderly couple beside her, in 23B and 23C, grew increasingly agitated with each passing moment. The woman, who looked to be in her 70s, kept pressing a trembling hand to her forehead. The man beside her, presumably her husband, held her other hand, whispering reassurances that sounded hollow even to Amara's ears. "My wife is diabetic," the elderly man said quietly to no one in particular, though Amara heard every word in the cramped space. "She needs to eat regularly. We've been here for hours already, and with the delay." His voice trailed off as the flight attendant approached their row. Amara could see the cart, nearly empty. Maybe 3 meals left, at most. The attendant's face was apologetic before she even spoke. "I'm so sorry," she said, addressing all 3 of them. "We only have 1 meal remaining for this row." The moment hung in the air like a held breath. Amara's stomach cramped with hunger. She thought about her mother back home, probably asleep now, unaware that her daughter's flight had been delayed. Her mother, who worked herself to exhaustion as a seamstress, taking on extra alterations just to help with Amara's school fees. Her mother, who often skipped meals herself to ensure Amara had enough to eat during exam periods. The elderly woman's hand trembled more visibly now. Her husband's face had gone pale, and Amara could see the calculation in his eyes. He would give his wife the meal, of course, but what about his own health? They both looked frail, vulnerable in a way that made Amara's chest tighten with an emotion she couldn't quite name. "Give it to them," Amara heard herself say, the words coming out before she'd fully formed the thought. "Please, give the meal to them." The flight attendant looked surprised. Are you sure? It's going to be at least another 8 hours before we land, and we don't have any other food service planned. Amara nodded, forcing a smile she didn't quite feel. I'm sure. I'm young, I can manage. They need it more than I do. The elderly couple turned to stare at her, shock evident on their faces. The woman's eyes filled with tears, and she reached out a weathered hand to grasp Amara's. Dear child, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, you don't have to do this. But Amara had already made up her mind. This was what her mother had taught her, that kindness wasn't about having extra to give, but about sharing even when you had little. She squeezed the woman's hand gently. Please, I insist. Besides, she added, trying to lighten the moment, I have some crackers in my bag somewhere. I'll be fine. She didn't have crackers. She had nothing but her books and her empty water bottle, but the lie came easily if it meant easing their concern. The man cleared his throat, emotion evident in the gesture. What's your name, young lady? Amara, she replied simply. Amara, he repeated, as if committing it to memory. That's a beautiful name. It means grace in some languages, doesn't it? She nodded, surprised he knew that. Most people didn't. Fitting, the woman said softly, finally releasing Amara's hand to accept the meal tray. Very fitting. The rest of the flight passed in a blur of hunger and exhaustion for Amara. She tried to focus on her books, reading the same paragraph over and over as her concentration wavered. The elderly couple had tried to share their meal with her, but she'd politely declined, not wanting to diminish her gesture by taking back even a portion of what she'd given. They talked sporadically throughout the flight. The couple revealed they were returning from their anniversary trip, 50 years of marriage, they said with pride. They asked about her studies, and Amara found herself opening up about her degree in business administration, her dreams of starting a non-profit to help underprivileged students access education, her struggles to balance work and school. You remind me of someone, the man said at one point, a strange smile playing at his lips. But he didn't elaborate, and Amara didn't press. When they finally landed, 14 hours after their scheduled departure time, Amara was dizzy with hunger and fatigue. She helped the elderly couple retrieve their bags from the overhead compartment, noticing how light their luggage seemed for international travelers. Thank you again, dear Amara, the woman said, pressing a small card into her hand. For everything. Amara glanced at the card. It had only a phone number, no name or business information. She slipped it into her pocket, intending to call and check on them in a few days, make sure they'd gotten home safely. They parted ways at baggage claim, and Amara thought that was the end of it. A strange, sweet encounter that she'd remember fondly but nothing more. She had no idea that the elderly couple was already making phone calls, setting events in motion that would shatter her ordinary world within hours. The journey home was a fog of exhaustion. Amara took 3 different buses to avoid the more expensive direct route, finally stumbling through her front door as dawn broke over the city. Her mother was already awake, preparing for her own work day. Amara, how was the conference? Did you eat? You look so tired, her mother fussed, immediately moving to warm up some leftover soup. It was good, Mama. Really good. I made some important connections, Amara said, gratefully accepting the bowl. She didn't mention the meal she'd given up. Her mother would have scolded her for not taking care of herself. They talked briefly about the conference, about the professors she'd met, the presentations she'd attended. Her mother listened with pride, her eyes shining with the kind of hope that made Amara's sacrifices worthwhile. This was why she worked so hard, to justify her mother's faith in her, to prove that their struggles would lead somewhere better. You should rest, her mother finally said. Don't you have your afternoon shift today? Amara nodded, though every fiber of her being screamed for sleep. Just a few hours. I'll be fine. But she'd barely closed her eyes when the sound shattered the morning quiet. Not a knock, a pounding, urgent and demanding. Amara shot up, heart racing. Who could it be? They weren't behind on rent. They didn't owe anyone money. Fear prickled at her spine as she heard her mother's footsteps moving toward the door. Who is it? Her mother called out, caution in her voice. Mrs. Johnson? We're looking for Amara Johnson. It's urgent. Amara was out of bed and down the hall before her mother could respond. Through the peephole, she saw something that made no sense. Men in black suits, earpieces visible, standing in formation like something out of a movie. "What's going on?" she whispered to her mother. "I don't know," her mother whispered back, fear evident in her voice. "Miss Johnson," the voice came again, more insistent. "We're not here to harm you. We're here on behalf of Mr. Alexander Cole. He urgently needs to speak with you about yesterday's flight." Alexander Cole. The name meant nothing to Amara, but it clearly meant something to her mother, whose eyes widened in shock. "The Alexander Cole?" her mother breathed. "The billionaire." Billionaire? Amara's mind raced. What could a billionaire possibly want with her? Unless, had something happened to the elderly couple? Were they connected to this man somehow? Fear shifted to concern. "Is everything okay?" she called through the door. "Did something happen to the couple from the plane?" There was a pause, then, "Mr. and Mrs. Cole are fine, Miss Johnson. They're the ones who sent us." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Cole. The elderly couple's surname was Cole. But surely not, surely they weren't. With trembling fingers, Amara opened the door. The man who stood at the front of the security detail was younger than she'd expected, perhaps mid-40s, with silver threading through his dark hair and eyes that held an intensity that made her want to step back. He was impeccably dressed in a suit that probably cost more than her entire year's tuition. "Miss Amara Johnson?" he asked formally. She nodded, unable to find her voice. "My name is Alexander Cole. The couple you helped yesterday, they're my parents." The words hit her like physical blows. The frail elderly couple she'd sat beside, who'd seemed so ordinary, so vulnerable, they were the parents of one of the country's most reclusive billionaires? "I don't understand," Amara managed to say. Alexander's expression softened slightly. "My parents value their privacy. They travel incognito, no first class, no special treatment. They believe it keeps them grounded, connected to reality. Yesterday's flight was supposed to be a simple journey home from their anniversary celebration. They didn't expect to encounter someone like you." "I just gave them a meal," Amara said, bewildered. "It wasn't a big deal." "Wasn't it?" Alexander stepped forward slightly. "Miss Johnson, do you know how many people were on that flight? How many heard the same announcement about limited meals? How many saw my parents' obvious distress? And how many did absolutely nothing?" The weight of his words settled over her. She hadn't thought about it that way. "My mother is indeed diabetic," he continued. "She could have had a serious medical episode without food. My father would have given her his portion, of course, but he's recovering from a recent heart surgery, something they didn't mention to you, I'm sure. They both needed that meal. You, a young woman who clearly couldn't afford to miss a meal yourself, gave it up without hesitation, without knowing who they were, without expecting anything in return." Amara felt her mother's hand slip into hers, a grounding presence as the surreal conversation continued. "They called me immediately after landing," Alexander said, his voice taking on a different quality, warmer, more personal. "My mother was in tears. She said they'd met an angel on that plane. She made me promise to find you." "But how did you find you?" "Miss Johnson, I have resources most people can't imagine. Your boarding pass, your name, it was enough. What I found when I looked into your background impressed me even more." Heat flooded Amara's cheeks. What had he found? Their financial struggles? Her mother's long work hours? Her own juggling act between jobs and school? A straight-A student working 2 jobs while supporting her mother, Alexander said, answering her unspoken question. A young woman who earned a spot at an international academic conference through sheer merit. Someone studying business with dreams of creating non-profit educational opportunities for others. "My parents were right, you are remarkable." "Mr. Cole," Amara started, but he held up a hand. "My parents would never forgive me if I didn't properly thank you for your kindness. More than that, they insist, and I agree, that such selflessness should be recognized and rewarded." He gestured to one of his security team, who stepped forward with a leather portfolio. "Miss Johnson, I would like to offer you a full scholarship for the remainder of your university education, including all fees, books, and living expenses. Amara's knees nearly buckled. Her mother gasped audibly. Additionally, Alexander continued, as if he hadn't just changed their entire world, a monthly stipend to ensure you can focus on your studies without the burden of multiple jobs. And upon graduation, a guaranteed internship at coal industries, with the possibility of permanent employment if you perform well, which, given everything I've learned about you, I have no doubt you will. Tears were streaming down Amara's face now, but Alexander wasn't finished. For your mother, he said, turning to address the woman directly, comprehensive health insurance and a pension fund. She's worked hard enough. It's time she had security. Amara's mother's hand flew to her mouth, her own tears flowing freely. I can't, Amara whispered. This is too much. I just gave them a meal. One meal. Alexander's expression grew serious. Miss Johnson, do you know what my company is worth? She shook her head. Billions. Multiple billions. Do you know what I've learned in all my years of building this empire? That money is just paper and numbers if it's not used to recognize and elevate good people. You showed my parents kindness when they were vulnerable. You gave when you had almost nothing to give. That's a quality that's rarer than any gem, more valuable than any stock portfolio. He paused, and for the first time, smiled, a genuine, warm smile that transformed his stern face. My parents want to stay in touch with you. My mother specifically said she wants to take you shopping for proper interview clothes when you start your internship. My father wants to hear about your non-profit ideas. He's quite passionate about education himself. They've taken a genuine interest in you, Miss Johnson. You've given them something money could never buy, faith that the next generation still understands the value of compassion. Amara looked at her mother, seeking guidance, permission, something to anchor her in this moment that felt too much like a dream. Her mother nodded through her tears, pride and joy radiating from every line of her face. Yes, Amara said, her voice stronger now. Yes, and thank you. Thank you so much. Alexander nodded, satisfied. The scholarship starts immediately. You'll receive the first stipend by end of business today. Someone from my office will contact you tomorrow with all the details. He turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Miss Johnson? My parents would like to have dinner with you next week. They're quite insistent. My mother wants to hear all about your studies, and my father is eager to discuss your business ideas. Will you come? Amara nodded, still too overwhelmed to speak. As the convoy of black SUVs pulled away from their modest apartment building, Amara and her mother stood in the doorway, holding each other, crying and laughing simultaneously. Neighbors had begun to peek out, wondering about the commotion, the expensive cars, the suited men who'd treated Amara like she was someone important. Because now, in a way she'd never expected, she was. The weeks that followed felt like living in a parallel universe. The dinner with the Coles, as Alexander's parents insisted she call them, became a weekly tradition. Mrs. Cole indeed took her shopping, but more than that, she became a mentor, sharing stories of her own struggles before Alexander's success, reminding Amara that wealth didn't erase humanity. Mr. Cole proved to be a brilliant business mind, despite his quiet demeanor. He helped Amara refine her non-profit concept, introducing her to concepts and strategies she'd never considered. Their dining room became her second classroom, one where the lessons were practical and the teachers had lived through everything they taught. The internship at coal industries started even before she graduated. Alexander personally oversaw her placement, ensuring she rotated through different departments to gain comprehensive experience. Her colleagues initially treated her with suspicion. Was she getting special treatment because of her connection to the CEO? But Amara's work ethic quickly won them over. She arrived first, left last, and brought the same selflessness to her corporate work that she'd shown on that plane. But here's what truly mattered, what Amara would tell reporters and interviewers in the months and years that followed. The gift wasn't just the money or the opportunities. It was the validation that kindness mattered, that small acts of compassion could ripple outward in ways no one could predict. Her story spread through social media, shared and reshared with comments about restoring faith in humanity. But Amara always redirected the focus. It wasn't about her, she insisted. It was about recognizing the opportunities we all have to change someone's life, even when we think we have nothing to give. 6 months after that fateful flight, Amara stood before a packed auditorium, delivering a presentation about her non-profit concept, now with seed funding promised by coal industries. Her mother sat in the front row, wearing a new dress she'd bought herself with her first pension check. The Coles sat beside her, beaming like proud grandparents. "We live in a world that often rewards those who take," Amara said to her audience, her voice clear and confident. "But I'm living proof that giving, even when you have little to give, can open doors you never knew existed. Every single one of us has the power to be someone's miracle. We just have to be willing to act when the moment presents itself." The speech went viral. By the end of the year, Amara's non-profit had launched, providing scholarships and mentorship to underprivileged students across the country. The first recipient was a young boy from her old neighborhood who reminded her of herself, brilliant but struggling, full of potential but lacking opportunities. At the scholarship ceremony, Alexander Cole gave a speech that would become legendary in business circles. "We spend so much time looking for the next big investment," he said. "But the best investment I ever made wasn't in a company or a technology. It was in recognizing and rewarding human kindness. Amara Johnson gave my parents a single meal on a delayed flight. In return, she's given the world a template for compassion, a reminder that success without kindness is failure, and that every act of generosity, no matter how small, has the potential to change the trajectory of a life." The ripple effects continued. Other wealthy individuals began seeking out and rewarding acts of everyday kindness. Airlines improved their contingency planning for delayed flights. Social media campaigns sprouted, encouraging people to look for opportunities to help strangers. But for Amara, the most meaningful moment came 2 years later. She was now a full-time executive at coal industries, running their entire corporate social responsibility division. She was on a flight, first class this time, a business trip, when an announcement came over the intercom about limited meal availability due to unexpected circumstances. She watched as passengers grumbled, complained, ignored the obvious distress of a young mother traveling alone with 2 children. Without hesitation, Amara stood up. "Excuse me," she called to the flight attendant. "I'd like to give up my meal. Please give it to that family." The mother's eyes filled with tears, reminding Amara so viscerally of that moment years ago that she had to steady herself against the seat. "Thank you," the mother whispered. "Thank you so much." "Pass it on," Amara replied simply. "Someday, somehow, pass it on." As she settled back into her seat, Amara thought about the circular nature of kindness, how it moved like a current through the world, touching lives in ways both seen and unseen. She thought about the Coles, who still insisted she join them for Sunday dinners, who had become the grandparents she'd never had. She thought about her mother, now retired and taking art classes, finally living for herself after years of sacrifice. She thought about all the scholarship recipients her non-profit had helped, young people who might have given up on their dreams if not for that extra push, that evidence that someone believed in them. And she thought about that moment on the plane, that split-second decision that had seemed so small at the time. How could she have known that giving up a single meal would lead to all of this? But that was the point, wasn't it? We never know which small act of kindness might change everything. We never know who's watching, who's being affected, whose life might pivot on our simple decision to care. By the way, if you're finding value in this story, if it's reminding you of the power of compassion and the importance of kindness, consider subscribing to our channel. We share stories every week that celebrate the best of humanity, that remind us all of our capacity to change lives, including our own. The legacy of Amara's story extended far beyond her personal success. Coal industries instituted what they called the Amara Principle, a policy of identifying and rewarding employees who demonstrated exceptional kindness and selflessness, both within and outside the workplace. Other corporations followed suit, creating a movement that prioritized character alongside competence. Universities began including case studies about Amara in their business ethics courses. The story of the meal on the plane became a modern parable, told and retold with various embellishments but always carrying the same core truth: kindness is never wasted. Amara herself remained remarkably grounded through it all. She still lived modestly, channeling most of her considerable salary into expanding her non-profit's reach. She still took public transportation when possible, still held doors for strangers, still looked for opportunities to help without expectation of reward. People ask me if I would have given up that meal if I'd known who they were, she told an interviewer on the 5th anniversary of the flight. The answer is that it shouldn't matter who someone is. Hunger is hunger. Need is need. Kindness shouldn't require a cost-benefit analysis. Mrs. Cole, now in her late 70s, would often tell people that Amara had saved her life twice, once with the meal that prevented a diabetic crisis, and again by restoring her faith in young people, giving her a reason to be excited about the future. Mr. Cole, despite his initial quiet demeanor, became one of Amara's most vocal champions, using his connections to open doors for her nonprofit, to introduce her to other philanthropists, to ensure her message reached the widest possible audience. And Alexander? He would later say that meeting Amara had fundamentally changed his approach to business. He instituted comprehensive employee support programs, understanding that investing in people's well-being was not just morally right but good business. Coal Industries became known as one of the best places to work in the country, with retention rates that made other CEOs envious. But perhaps the most powerful testament to Amara's impact came from the thousands of letters and emails she received from people around the world. Stories of meals shared, of strangers helped, of kindness offered in moments of personal scarcity. Each writer credited her story with inspiring them to act, to give, to care. One letter particularly stood out. It was from a teenager in a rural town who had been considering dropping out of school to work full-time, to help his struggling family. He'd heard Amara's story on social media and decided to stay in school, to believe that somehow things would work out. A local business owner, also inspired by Amara's story, had started a scholarship fund. The teenager was the first recipient. "You showed me that miracles aren't always big, dramatic things," he wrote. "Sometimes they are as simple as someone choosing to care. Thank you for reminding me to look for my moment to be someone's miracle." This is what Amara would want us all to remember: we're all capable of changing lives. We all have opportunities, every single day, to choose kindness over indifference, generosity over selfishness, compassion over apathy. We might not all encounter billionaires' parents on a plane, but we will encounter human beings in need, and our response in those moments defines not just who we are but who we might become. Here's a question for all of you listening. Can you remember a time when a stranger's kindness changed your day, your perspective, or even your life? What small act of compassion have you witnessed or received that stayed with you? Share your stories in the comments below. Let's create a collection of reminders that kindness is all around us, waiting to be given and received. The plain meal that started it all became a symbol, but symbols only have power when they inspire action. Amara scholarship recipients went on to become doctors, teachers, engineers, artists, each carrying forward the lesson that success means nothing without the willingness to lift others up. Her nonprofit expanded internationally, partnering with organizations around the world to identify and support promising students who lacked resources. The selection criteria always included a component about character, about demonstrations of kindness and community service. Academic excellence was important, but Amara insisted that compassion be weighted equally. Years later, when Amara was invited to speak at the United Nations about corporate social responsibility and the power of individual action, she stood before world leaders and told the same simple story: a delayed flight, a hungry elderly couple, a meal given freely, and the cascade of consequences that followed. "We often think we need power to make a difference," she said, her voice carrying across the assembly hall. "We think we need wealth, position, influence. But I'm here to tell you that the greatest power any of us possesses is the power to choose kindness in any given moment. That choice, that simple decision to care, can redirect the course of history, not just for individuals, but for communities, for nations, for the world." The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. But Amara always returned to the personal, the individual stories that reminded her why this work mattered. Like the girl who wrote to say that Amara's story had inspired her to sit with the lonely kid at lunch, and that lonely kid had turned out to be a brilliant artist who just needed a friend. Or the businessman who started paying for coffee for the person behind him in line every morning, creating a chain reaction of generosity that sometimes lasted for hours. These stories, Amara believed, were the real measures of success. Not the corporate position, not the accolades, not even the thousands of scholarships, but the shift in consciousness, the reminder that we are all connected, that our actions matter, that kindness is not weakness but the greatest strength humanity possesses. 10 years after the flight, Amara established the Kindness Anniversary, an annual event where people were encouraged to perform unexpected acts of generosity. It started small, just a social media campaign, but it grew into a global phenomenon. Cities organized kindness flash mobs. Corporations gave employees paid time off to volunteer. Schools made it a teaching opportunity about empathy and community service. The Coles, now in their 80s, attended every anniversary event they could, their faces glowing with pride. They had gained not just a friend in Amara but a daughter, someone who visited them regularly, who called to check on their health, who never forgot their birthdays or their anniversary, the same anniversary they'd been celebrating when they met her. "You know what the best part is?" Mrs. Cole said to Amara at one event, her voice soft with age but strong with conviction. "It's not what Alexander did for you, dear. It's what you've done with it. You could have taken the opportunities and focused solely on your own success. Instead, you've multiplied the kindness 1,000-fold. That meal you gave us? It's still feeding people all these years later." And it was true. The initial act of kindness had become a movement, a philosophy, a way of being in the world. Business schools taught about it. Religious leaders preached about it. Parents told their children about it as a bedtime story with a moral that was both simple and profound. Your kindness matters more than you can possibly imagine. Amara never forgot where she came from. The apartment where she'd lived with her mother became a community center, purchased and renovated with her first major bonus. Her mother, now a grandmother figure to hundreds of neighborhood kids, taught sewing classes there, passing on skills and stories in equal measure. The 2 jobs Amara had worked while in school? She established emergency funds at both places for employees facing financial crises. The university where she'd struggled to pay tuition? She endowed a chair in social entrepreneurship, ensuring that future students would learn not just how to build businesses but how to build better communities. Every decision was filtered through a simple question: how can this create more kindness in the world? Alexander Cole would often joke that Amara had cost him millions, funding her programs, supporting her initiatives, matching her donations. But he always followed it with a serious observation: it's the best investment I've ever made. Stock markets rise and fall. Companies succeed and fail. But the kindness Amara has put into the world? That's yielding returns that will outlast us all. The story could end here, with success and acclaim, with lives changed and kindness multiplied. But that wouldn't be true to Amara's philosophy. Because for her, there was no ending, just continuous opportunities to give, to care, to lift others up. Even now, years into her success, she still looks for those moments. The tired cashier who needs an encouraging word. The stressed parent in the grocery store who could use a helping hand. The young person who just needs someone to believe in them. Because that's what the elderly couple on the plane had really given her, not just the connection to their billionaire son, not just the opportunities that followed, but the proof that her kindness was seen, that it mattered, that it had value beyond any monetary measurement. And that's what she tries to give others, that same recognition, that same validation, that same proof that their kindness, no matter how small it seems, is changing the world. The meal on the plane was never just about the food. It was about choosing to see need and respond to it. It was about valuing human dignity over personal comfort. It was about believing that we are all responsible for each other, that our individual actions contribute to the collective human experience. As you go about your day after hearing this story, remember that you carry within you the same power Amara had on that plane. The power to notice. The power to care. The power to act. You might not encounter a billionaire's parents, but you will encounter fellow human beings navigating their own struggles, carrying their own burdens, needing their own moments of grace. Your kindness, however small it might seem, could be the miracle someone needs. It could be the moment that changes a trajectory, that opens a door, that reminds someone that goodness exists in the world. The question isn't whether you'll have opportunities to be kind, you will every single day. The question is whether you'll recognize them, whether you'll act on them, whether you'll choose to be someone's unexpected blessing. Because here's the ultimate truth that Amara's story teaches us: we don't need to be rich to be generous. We don't need to be powerful to make a difference. We don't need to be extraordinary to do extraordinary things. We just need to be willing to give when we see need, to care when it would be easier not to choose kindness when the world gives us every excuse to choose otherwise. That meal on the plane? It wasn't about the food. It was about humanity recognizing humanity. It was about grace in action. It was about the simple, revolutionary act of caring for strangers as if they were family. And that's something every single one of us can do, starting right now, starting today.